Hello, everyone. My name is Cindy Tsai. I am the Executive Vice President and General Counsel for Committee of 100. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Committee of 100 is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. For the past 35 years, we have been at the intersection of Chinese American inclusion and bill bridging between the people of the United States and Greater China. The Equity Pulse is a new webinar series that we started this year. It stems from a finding from our State of Chinese American survey. We saw that over the last few years, Chinese Americans, Asian Americans have sense of belonging here in the US have decreased. We wanted to create a safe space for us to discuss the issues on belonging and other issues that impact our community. Today's session centers around Asian American representation in media. The Devil Wears Prada 2 highly anticipated release involves several promotional videos, one of which included the character Jin Chao, Andy Sack's new assistant. I'm going to show the clip now so that we are all have a framing in regards to what we're talking about today.
Yeah, so I'm looking after the art department.
You like?
Very much.
Are you Andy?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Jin Chao. I'm your new assistant.
Cool, I was wondering about that. Nice to meet you.
I was an intern this morning, but when a desk opens up, the interns get a chance to interview. And guess what? Nobody wanted to work in your department because it's not actual fashion. So I just got it. Isn't that cool?
Very.
You don't want me.
No, I didn't say that.
If you don't want me, you can interview someone else. That's totally fine. I did go to Yale, 3.86 GPA, lead soprano of the Whiff and Poops, and my ACT score was 36 on the very first try, but...
No, you seem great. I'm happy to have you. Great. Okay, great. Okay.
Following the release of this clip, netizens in China and the US called for a boycott, arguing that the character Jin Chao was built on Asian stereotypes and didn't reflect true Asian Americans. Today, we are honored to have three experts, Georgia Lee, Jeff Yang, and Phil Yu, to talk a bit about the backlash, as well as the nuance of advocating for AAPI representation in television and film. The discussion will be moderated by Julia B. Chang, editor-in-chief of The 19th, a nonprofit newsroom that focuses on the way gender and race dynamics shape U.S. politics and the reverse, how policies and legislation impact people. Before I turn it over to Julia, a few housekeeping. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on C100's webpage as well as YouTube. We will have a Q&A session toward the end. Please use the Q&A box on the bottom to ask your questions. And then at the end of this webinar, there will be a short survey. Please do take a couple of minutes to complete those. We do look at them carefully and adjust our programming based on your feedback. And now, without further ado, Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Thanks for laying the groundwork for today's conversation. And thanks to C100 for making space for what feels like a very timely conversation for all of us to have today. So I want to walk through our three stellar experts we have with us today. It's such an honor. I want to start with Georgia Lee. She's an award-winning writer and filmmaker. She created and was the showrunner for Netflix Partner Track. Georgia's written for The Expanse and The 100. She also wrote and directed her first feature, Red Doors, which won numerous awards on the festival circuit, as well as specifically at the Tribeca Film Festival, one of my favorites. She's a recovering management consultant, having worked for McKinsey & Co. before running away to Hollywood. And today she ran from Hollywood to Zoom. Thanks for being with us today, Georgia.
Thanks for having me, Julia.
Of course, excited to talk more. Up next, we have Phil Yu. Phil is a Peabody Award-winning writer and creator of Angry Asian Man, a blog, a brand, a whole identity, celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. Congratulations, Phil. If y'all aren't familiar, Angry Asian Man is one of the most widely read and longest running independent websites covering news, culture, and perspectives from the Asian American community, for, as I said, now over 25 years. He's the co-author of the New York Times bestseller Rise, a pop history of Asian America from the 90s to now, and co-host of the podcast They Call Us Bruce, which he happens to partner with our next guest, Jeff Yang. If you all know Jeff, he is a New York Times best-selling author, cultural critic. He's been observing, exploring, writing about Asian America for over 30 years. His first movie as a screenwriter, A Great Divide, y'all can watch on Amazon Video. And the first season of the food journey show he developed and sold with his son, Hudson Yang, Crash Course Cuisine, y'all can now check out on Hulu and Nat Geo. He's currently collaborating with legendary actor James Hong on Hong's memoirs, which will be published in September. I think Jeff, alongside Min Jin's next book, those are the two I'm buying in September. So Jeff, we're going to start with you. You recently wrote about for Angry Asian Man. You recently wrote about this exact scenario that Cindy just walked us through about how the Jin Chao character, there was a internet backlash, and how that backlash actually could be self-defeating for us and AAPI communities. It might be a reason studios want to pull back from Asian American representation. Can you help us set the stage today and the conversation today to share some of your arguments with us?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you so much to the Committee of 100 for hosting this and hosting us, and thank you guys for attending. Really pretty remarkable to see as many people show out for a midday conversation like this. But it's a timely moment for us to be engaging in this conversation, not least because here we are in, well, the last third of the month usually called APA Heritage Month. And it feels like there's been a real muting of our celebration, of our being put into a situation where we're telling our stories and remembering why we're here and why we should be happy to be here. And it's funny because they released this movie, The Devil Wears Prada 2, uh, into this month, right? Probably not knowing that a relatively small character was going to end up being the center of this internet firestorm. It was shocking to me too, because I saw the movie months ago. I actually had the chance to see it very early. And when I saw it, I was actually really kind of excited, not just because Helen J. Shen is amazing. She's a fantastic actress of stage and screen. This part is a small part. But for those of you guys who are fans of the franchise, the emerging franchise, she's basically playing the same role that Andy, e.g. Anne Hathaway's character, played in the first movie. She is Andy 2.0. And she begins, much like Anne Hathaway, in a sort of uh, early gestational state, right? As an intern turned assistant who is maybe poorly dressed, certainly quirky, very insecure, resting on her laurels as a graduate from elite college, but looking to just grow and learn from somebody who she's kind of concerned, given the way that, fashion publishing and publishing in general is just going to crap on her all day. That's what happened to Andy. And I actually was in that role. I was an assistant when I first started out. I took a job coming out of an elite college, Ivy League, right? And was paid $17,000 a year to be crapped on all day. For me, Jin
That's
Chao,
17, right? Not 70. You said 17.
17.
1-7.
Oh, I
Okay.
thought you said 70 as
Oh,
well.
I
I
wish.
just want to make sure people are clear.
I
Yeah.
was like, that's actually not that bad, Jeff.
I was surviving on like leftovers from cocktail receptions, and living on a sofa in a friend's apartment. So I know this girl because this girl is me. I look into the mirror of this and I say to myself, every Asian American who came out overeducated but aspiring towards a creative career faced exactly this story. And yet, on the basis of this tiny fragmentary clip out of a torrent of different clips being released around this movie, first audiences in China, and then eventually audiences in America and among Asian America just made conclusions about who Jin Chao was, what she represented. and decided that they were going to get very, very angry. And I am angry. I am part of an angry army. Thank you, General Phil. And I, I know when there are times we have to stand up and speak out. But I also, as a journalist, and as somebody who's just a watcher of culture, know that it's important for us to first immerse ourselves and understand context, to really experience what the full story is, and to not instantly react when we see something by knee-jerk reflex. And unfortunately, that's what happened here. And I wrote this piece for Phil's site, in part in celebration of Angry Asian Man and Phil's 25th anniversary with it, but in part also to just reflect a little bit on what it means for us as Asian Americans in this era where it feels like being Asian American has come off of highs and is now in kind of a lull, but also in a moment when we're trying to think about what's next for us as storytellers and as audiences. And I'm hoping this teaches people a little bit of a lesson that we are finally in a place where we can and should speak out, but we should also just recognize there's a wide array of experiences and voices and stories to be told. And the nerdy Asian made good, that's one of them.
Yeah.
That's an aspirational one for me.
Thanks for that, Jeff. I think it really speaks to something I feel like we've been grappling with the last few years, especially, with Crazy Rich Asians a few years back, that we are starved for these stories and we want everyone to be everything. And I think this current scenario really shows us how a slice of someone's character can really spark such a big reaction because we're in this place to want to demand more and we want to continue to. So as we continue to really use this film as a jumping off point, I'm very curious to hear from you, Georgia, and your perspective. Still kind of staying with this film for now, how did you process this situation as a filmmaker?
Honestly, my first awareness of this was Jeff and the C100 conversation around it. So I think that's also very important for those of us who may not, be in the zeitgeist all the time or watching culture as closely. So it was actually very eye-opening for me. The first exposure to it was your wonderful article, Jeff, on Phil's wonderful site. So, and then I watched the film. Obviously having all of that in my head going in, I 100% agree with Jeff, which is that Jeff and Phil, I assume they share the same philosophy. Yes.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, exactly. I know Jeff pretty well, so I don't know Phil at all. So Jeff and I have known each other for a very long time, being nerdy Asians who left a certain school to try and make it in Hollywood. Yes, yeah. But so I feel like the conversation about what is positive representation and all of that is moving to a point of I always say volume and variety. We need just a multiplicity, a plurality. And when I watch the film, I don't want to give away a twist at the ending, but there are other Asian characters. And not that, that's enough, but that certainly is part of the direction in which we should move towards. And I think we want to flood the zone essentially with lots of, like when there are only five Asian characters, that you see in Hollywood, then of course they do all the load bearing of all our anxieties and our hopes. But if there are 50 or 500 Asian characters and they're playing heroes and villains and losers and cool people and boring people and exciting, and then it stops being a stereotype. Yep. And I feel like that's the solution, not to make a Mary Sue, and so that's what I personally believe. I could go on about that, but that's I think the solution.
Thanks for that. I truly believe we could talk for hours about this. But Phil, let's get to your heart and mind, and see how aligned it is with Jeff's thinking here. I'm very curious to hear, whether or not you agree with some of the arguments Jeff is making, and not to paint you with just this linear angry man brush. But, oftentimes in the community, we're taught to stay alert, speak up early, make noise. And that's been a lot of pushback on the pushback. And I'm curious how, you respond to that as someone who does encourage us to speak up early and often.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've spent a whole career encouraging people to be super media literate, look at things with a critical eye, particularly when it comes to, the depiction of Asians in movies and television. And yes, for sure, like be vigilant and not sort of just accept things shoveled our way. That said, I mean, I hadn't seen this movie. Like I knew Jeff had seen it, and then I saw his sort of like his one man like sort of campaign to try to squash these haters, like, and I was just like, what? My wife and I were like, Jeff, it's like we're just like, sometimes it's not worth it. You know what I mean? Like seeing like each thread post, like trying to like battle back, and I'm just like, I don't.
Not
Movie's not
every
even out
hero
yet.
wears a cape.
Yeah. And I'm like, all right, but like I trusted Jeff's, sort of take on this, sight unseen, and even when he offered to write this piece for Angry Asian Man, I was like, yeah, go for it, and so, uh, yes, and I having seen the film, um, like I also agree, like it got way out of hand. It was very sort of blown out of proportion. It was a disproportionate response to what really transpired. That said, like, could the movie have done it a little bit more less clumsily, like to sort of sidestep some of this? Yeah, like I honestly, some of it probably could have. I don't know. You could have cut off a lot of like sort of unnecessary detail that goes into this scene. Like you could have just sidestepped. Like I don't know. Like a lot of people took issue with the character's name, Jin Chao. Like that's a perfectly legitimate name. If you had named her Jenny, I swear to God, none of this would have happened. Like you know what I mean? And but that's fine. I mean, like um, naming her Jin Chao clearly stamps the character in the script as Asian, right? So like that's you can take that for what it is. Uh, People take, but then like people were like saying like, did they call her Ching Chong? And I was like, that's not even close to what she said. I didn't understand that sort of strain of the argument where people were like really offended by that. I was like, that's not what they're saying at all. People take issue with the fact that she's nerdy. I'm like, I'm sorry, but there are Asian nerds, so we need to kind of embrace that. None of that is sort of like an Asian stereotype, inherently. So, um, and then on top of all that, I think that uh, I think the three of us, as people who are creators and adjacent to creators, we take a little bit like, look, that can't be all that it is, and we kind of understand that there are a lot of steps that can happen, and there's much more context behind all of this, and so maybe we're a little more sensitive and not as quick to judge. Um, that says, I will admit, like being part of sort of like a push to be more for Asian Americans to be more outspoken about these kinds of things. Like, just don't let everything slide. That said, I think Jeff obviously makes the strong case is like we have to be media literate as well, right?
Yeah. And I think the three of you are all kind of getting at like how nuanced this is. Jeff, your piece in and of itself is, really walks us through not only the history, but you're asking people to take a beat. You also walk through something that happens in media all the time where the first reaction goes viral, right? And then the subsequent, like, oh, I actually read the whole piece or watched the whole movie. Like you're asking folks to take a beat, understand the whole story, and in this case, the whole film, and folks aren't doing that. And so I am curious to kind of zoom out a little bit now and think about, and us maybe even like scenario play out, whether or not you feel like this situation or similar ones could impact how likely Hollywood might want to pull back from AAPI roles or be too careful with them, right? There's also this issue of overcasting that can happen where folks might feel like, in Georgia, you might be able to speak to this far better than I can, but where there have been conversations I know had around how closely hewed to a character's identity an actor might need to be.
Yeah.
And so I think we see a lot of how folks want to do the right thing or do what they think is the right thing, manifest in different ways. I would just love to kind of unpack that with you all. So maybe I'll start with you, Georgia. Like, what Do you think incidences like this can have an impact on AAPI representation in what we see?
Yes, I think they can. And I agree with um, my esteemed colleagues that 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 it can have a negative effect. And I think it's actually even more subtle potentially than we think, which is that if you're a studio, if you're Netflix, if you're whatever, your reaction might be like, well, we'll still have the Asian token character or whatever, but they have to be conflict free, a conflict free
Yeah.
diamond, kind of thing. Like, and so, and the problem with that, again, this speaks to the plurality issue, is that as I'm sure it was, we all know as writers, and I find myself, I just got a note about this last night, that I was they're like, Georgia, you're protecting her, the character. I'm like, yes, but they're like, well, if you protect her, the character will be flat and uninteresting. And then are we really doing a service to anybody, right? And so I really think specificity is the antidote to symbolism, if you will.
Yes.
And so again, and the way we do this, there have to be lots of characters.
Yeah.
And in partner track also, the character is very flawed. She's extremely flawed, and we had a lot of conversations, and there's a lot of discomfort around that, of course, but you want characters to be able to make mistakes. You want them to be real. And then about the heritage issue, in partner track, it was written by Helen Wan, who's Chinese American. I'm Chinese American. We wanted to make it a Chinese American story, and we did a whole casting call. And the person who happened to be right for the role was Arden Cho, who is Korean American. And we had a whole conversation about that. We spoke to Helen about it, and ultimately we decided that. That because at heart the story of partner track was about an Asian American woman trying to succeed, find her way in a world that was a primarily male white space, that her being an Asian American woman still carried the heart of that story. Whether she was Chinese or Korean, her experience was probably not going to be that changed. And so in that specific case, we're like, okay, this is in consultation with the author, we were okay with that. And then we actually brought in a Korean American consultant specifically, and in concert with Arden, to talk about how to change those specifically Chinese experiences to Korean. But yeah, that's how we handled it. But yeah, it is a very, in a different story, you might not want to, you might not make those choices.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really good to hear the intentionality in which y'all made those decisions and how these different nuances play out. Phil and Jeff, curious to hear from you too about impacts you think this kind of dialogue or backlash might have on representation in Hollywood.
Like Jeff, you might have more stories about that, right?
I mean, actually, I want to add something to expand it beyond Hollywood. So if you have something to say specifically about Hollywood, I want to put it in the larger context, actually, of U.S.-China media relations, media and relations, right? So, Phil, if you want to step forward and talk about Hollywood first.
I mean, the only thing I would say is like, yes, I've seen like stories about casting agents being all of a sudden being suddenly being very conscious about casting, like, oh, this is a Korean American character. We need to have like, what is the ethnicity of these, you know, you know, Korean actors only need apply, like, and then all of a sudden it closes that, even though maybe the character itself doesn't like specifically have to be Korean. Daniel Day Kim has this really great interview where he expands on this idea where like the hypersensitivity, the hyperfocus, the sort of hyper specificity about this has kind of been an overcorrection. That's I think that's just people who don't know any better and obviously haven't gone into trying to be a little more nuanced about it, just being a little bit kind of one size fits all approach to it, being like, well, we can only Chinese people can be Chinese characters, and not really understanding like there is case by case sort of scenario where like it matters when it matters and it doesn't matter when it doesn't. Like if that makes any sense, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it gets at what Georgia said about the heart of the story. I mean, I think, especially being the writer, the creator of something, if the heart of your message, and this happens a lot, in journalism as well, if you're able to drill down to what that is, then you're able to kind of remove yourself from this idea of a perfect victim. That comes up a lot. There is no such thing, right? And if the only way we can tell that message is to not really go into the intricacies of the human experience, I think that that is a huge loss for storytelling overall. So I just want to kind of pull at that thread there with Georgia. But Jeff, sounds like you want to take us global. So why don't you go there for us?
So, I mean, just candidly, the reason why I got to see the movie so early is because uh, journalism being what it is, I also work as a consultant for a number of studios and networks, uh, primarily just giving them an early read on stuff to see what the impact might be in both, just the broader critical environment, but also specifically in China, because I've done a fair amount of work there for, again, both local and international studios and concerns. And the thing that was interesting to me is I'd I'd actually noted that there was another character. Again, I'm not going to entirely spoil, but there's another character who I thought was going to be a point of kind of narrative interest on the part of Chinese and Asian Americans. I mean, it's been out long enough. We know Lucy Liu plays a really significant role in this. Not a major role, but a significant one. And ultimately, she's also playing a role that is pivotal to the intent of the movie, which is to explore the relationship between media and technology and money and fashion and how all those things have converged in very strange ways with very strange bedfellows. Uh, just for some context, The Devil Wears Prada was not a giant hit in China when it was released, but it was extremely influential. It actually became a part of both the initial rise of luxury as a category in China. It was aspirational for women, especially working women. It gave rise to a conversation about workplace politics, about interacting with mentors versus tyrants. And as a result, there was actually quite a lot of early buzz around Devil Wears Prada too. But here's where things kind of get sticky, right? One of the things I caution a lot when I speak to studios is that you cannot really target a movie to China. And what I mean by that is you can make a movie that has Chinese anchors and antecedents or cast or storylines, etc. But you cannot say, I'm going to make this movie and make it successful in China because there are so many variables and factors that can lead you astray when you try to patronize or pander to the Chinese audience, but especially when you think you know what you're doing for a moment when the culture itself is constantly evolving and geopolitics is in continuous flux. And one thing that I think people aren't really fully engaged with is the fact that China is very, very uh, adept at using soft power as a mechanism for political leverage. They will attack pop culture as a means to push back on geopolitical issues or concerns ranging from economic to military, right? There are reasons why, K-pop was and K-dramas were pushed back on and almost effectively banned for like half a generation. And that was because Korea permitted the United States to place THAAD missiles, right, in its territory. There's a reason why anime voice actor concerts were being canceled, in as recently as like 18 months ago, and that's because Japan's new prime minister announced that she would stand up for Taiwan if Taiwan were invaded. So there are consequences for every single beat and blip of relationships between China and other countries on imported popular culture. And The Devil Wears Prada 2 ended up kind of on the back foot of some of that without people really recognizing because the uh, the whole sort of Strait of Hormuz situation and the posturing around that regarding oil imports with very significant impacts to China uh, clearly at least paved the way for China wanting to play a card, right? Like use that sort of soft power, anti-soft power lever to prove that it can shift weight around. And again, I'm not going to say it's a direct linear relationship, but it is interesting to note that the backlash to Devil Wears Prada 2 began with anonymous people, anonymous netizens
Mm.
in China, was instantly amplified by state-owned media, flared up, and then when the movie got released, basically disappeared. Like if you go and look on Chinese platforms today, no one's talking about Jin Chao anymore. No one's even talking about the movie anymore. It did okay. It actually is, I think, tripled the gross in China of the original Devil Wears Prada. But more importantly, the cultural currency and the supposed outbreak of rage has basically disappeared. So those are things that are earmarks of, at the very least, a state uh, acknowledged campaign, if not a state-run campaign, to elevate a certain kind of messaging, to say we're not going to let the United States and therefore Hollywood essentially come in and push us around, uh, and we'll flex a little to show that you can't budge us.
Mm.
It's a really interesting perspective, Jeff. Do you have any thoughts on why ultimately? And whether or not, I mean, it doesn't feel like they succeeded if there was a goal to kind of disrupt the opening or ticket sales or garner, mobilization here among AAPI communities. It feels like it was very online.
It's very online, but again, I don't think the point was to kill the film. It was to flex and show that we could if we wanted to in
Sure.
some ways.
Right.
But also just to do a little bit of an embarrassment. I do think that Western luxury goods are have a very kind of tense locus right now in China. I think there's a sense that Chinese and both Chinese businesses and Chinese consumers increasingly feel like, why are we exporting our hard-earned wealth into the hands of luxury manufacturers in Europe and maybe the United States? And there is a sense in which Devil Wears Prada 2 very much was uh, the next flagship, attempt to inject juice into the luxury aspiration market in China. So there may have been a piece of that too. But either way, I think it was just more of a flex than anything else.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, we have people in the audience even, like Janet Yang, who can speak much more in depth about the very complicated uh, interaction and intersection of politics and popular culture when it comes to China and U.S.-China relationships. But I will say that it's something we need to keep an eye on, and it's more than just China trying to engage Chinese Americans or Asian Americans, because the really dirty secret is most Chinese netizens do not care about representation of Chinese Americans on screen, certainly. They definitely do not care about stories coming from our communities. There are ways of telling stories that relate to them, but it's not through some sort of political alignment or instant kind of sense of cross-oceanic brotherhood to elevate, say, immigrant and post-immigrant diaspora stories or something like that.
Yeah. Not for today, but Jeff, I would love to hear your thoughts on China maxing and that whole
Oh, yeah.
and where that came from and how that's being amplified. But we're close to time, and I have a question to kind of close this out for all three of you. Because we've talked so much today about the progress we have been seeing, while it's been very much intertwined with criticism. That is how things can evolve and grow. But I do believe we're at this point where we are past simply asking to just see someone who looks like us on screen. And I'm curious to hear from all three of you what you think we should be demanding. What do you want to see now? What do you want to see more of? And why don't Georgia, I'll go with you and then move through Phil and then Jeff.
Yeah, well, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I feel like we just want to see more, 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 more,
Yes.
and of all different kinds. And I think it's interesting. I'm really fascinated by Jeff, your take on it potentially was a China flex thing. I was going to say the world having scarcity panic, I think, isn't the right reaction. I think the reaction is like, we want more. Like, let's just like, I mean, I know this is a very small tactical thing. I think we want to make a distinction between script writers, creators, and marketing departments, because I feel like the trailer was maybe if we have more conversations if with the marketing departments of how they put out what they put out, and that might be helpful too. But yeah, I would just say that again, the antidote to all of this is more characters and more specificity.
Here, here. Phil?
Um, yeah, I mean, I kind of have to agree with that. It's like this all happens because we only have 30 seconds to go on, and we only have this, this one out of a handful of Asian characters in this movie to go on. If and so we're so desperate to see ourselves reflected in some way. It's like when we ever see that, we there's this term called the rep sweats that a couple of me and my friends came up with, and it's like we're always so like, oh God, there's an Asian character. What are we gonna do? Like, please be good. That's that reaction. That's like a terrible place to consume media, right? Like, but it is. We've been sort of trained to do that. I think I would like to get to a place where we're not like just fed these little scraps and that's all we have to go on. It's like, can we imagine a world where I mean, this wasn't possible 20 years ago, but like, can we imagine a world where like Miranda or Emily or Andy are played by Asian American women? Like,
Yes.
like
Yes,
is that conceivable to be like?
exactly.
Actually, I think Asian Americans have kind of locked themselves out of that in some ways. Like, oh, is that a possibility? Like, I would like to think that we maybe we could dream a little bit harder about that, you know?
We're
Plus
trying, Phil. We're trying really hard.
And I have to say, plus one more API editor in chiefs. So, Jeff, your take on this question.
Phil, I do want to point you to this really good Netflix series called The Partner Track, where anyway.
We're trying. She's the main character. Yes.
That's what I'm saying. So two things. First of all, 70 years ago, in May, in fact, Mao Zedong publicly said, "Let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 schools of thought contend," right? And he was not talking about diversity. And in fact, in that speech, he quickly pulled that back and engineered a cultural revolution. But that all said, there is a sense in which more absolutely does mean, at least if not better, than richer, right? More textured. And getting more stories out there, not requiring each one to be load bearing, to use your term, Georgia, is so critical for us to advance as a culture collectively, not just as Asian Americans, right? The reason why we need diversity and inclusion is not because of some sort of charitable impulse. It's because that's the way we grow stronger and richer and more abundant in stories, in the stories we tell to one another, in engaging audiences locally and globally. I think that so I kind of foreshadowed a little bit that there are ways of telling stories that make sense not just to Asian Americans but to the world, not just to Chinese, but Chinese, not just Chinese Americans, but Chinese. And I feel like we're at the cusp of a lot of that. And the big part really is a bolder rethinking of the way that we engage with both the inherent stories of our traditions, our diaspora traditions, but also the cultural roots we come from, and find places that kind of merge and bring forth new creations from the intersections. I'm going to use an example which I think everybody, especially if they have kids in the house and young women especially, will recognize quite well, and that is K-pop Demon Hunters. Speaking of art and show, it is a story set in Korea and that celebrates and explores Korean traditions, but that does so through a very natively Asian American and Asian Canadian lens, right? The way that the characters talk and interact, the way they move through space and through story is so legible for Asian American audiences. And the combination of that legibility, that kind of cultural fluency that we bring, and the global storytelling with these very inherently Korean anchors in culture, I think allowed it to be hugely successful, not just in the United States, but on a global basis, because people are seeking that kind of specific universal storytelling, to what Georgia said before. And when I've visited Korea multiple times since, incredibly sustainably, you cannot avoid hearing golden coming from speakers in taxis and in restaurants. This is the first Korean North American thing to ever really be successful in Korea proper, right? They've embraced this. But it's not alone, right? We have so many stories that are at the edge of kind of American storytelling or North American storytelling and Asia. We can think of Shogun, right? Again, an inherently Japanese tale with Japanese actors in Japanese, but that was written by and lensed through the ambitions and identity of Asian American storytellers. There's a show coming out soon called The Season, right? Set in Hong Kong. It tells a very, kind of specifically Hong Kongese story, a little Crazy Rich Asian-esque, but nevertheless, it has Asian American actors, Asian American storytellers behind it. It is again, emergent story coming out of the intersection of these worlds, and they're trying to make it work across both. I think that that is very possible, but as audience members and ultimately as storytellers ourselves, we have to let it be possible. And that's part of the reason why I was so kind of riled up about this Jin Chao thing.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Jeff. You just gave us some really great examples of really current examples of that more. And I think ending on this note of more is a hopeful one, and one that I think will see us through a lot more of this disruption and change, quite frankly. So thank you to the three of you for a really hearty conversation today. I want to throw it back to Cindy to close us out. And thanks C100 again for today.
Well, thank you, Julia, Georgia, Jeff, and Phil. Really appreciate the time that you have taken out of your schedule to join us this afternoon. And so the big takeaway, dream big. We want more volume, more variety. Thank you all for joining us today. If you enjoyed today's webinar, please do share the recording with your network. It'll be available on our website and YouTube channel in a few days. And if you would like to support this program, and able to do so, please feel free to go to donate.committee100.org. Have a wonderful long weekend holiday, and we'll see you next month.